The scent of blood still clings to my lungs even now, 3 months after they dragged me to this place and positioned me outside that frozen, lightless cell. My name is Jamie and I'm only 16 years old. My parents were murdered by an alpha gang because they accidentally witnessed an illegal trade operation. Nobody saved me. Nobody even tried. The government labeled me a ward of the state, and then delivered this punishment disguised as opportunity. The council pulled me from the Orphan Omega registry and forced me into labor at a maximum security military prison. I'm just a food server here, but everyone knows the truth about this place. It's more dangerous than a graveyard, and the monsters inside are very much alive. This morning, when they first sent me into Block 7, I learned exactly who I'd be feeding. Cell 407. Cain Ashford. The head guard grabbed my wrist and stopped me cold, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. If you make eye contact with that alpha even once, your scent will spike and your pheromones will burst out of control, and he will tear you apart. My soul went cold. Cain Ashford, that name was everywhere in the media. An alpha war criminal who had destroyed 3 governments from the inside out. They'd captured him alive only because he surrendered right before they could execute him. But nobody understood why he gave himself up. The tray trembled in my hands as I approached the iron gate of his cell. Inside I could see nothing but darkness. Only the faint sound of breathing, slow, controlled, deliberate, as if even his oxygen intake was calculated and intentional. I slid the tray through the bottom slot and turned to leave without looking up. But then his voice cut through the silence. Wait, one word. Just one. But that voice was so deep it sent electricity racing down my spine. I froze in place, holding my own breath. Turn around, Omega, he spoke again. This time his tone softened just slightly. I knew I shouldn't turn. Every instinct screamed at me to keep walking. But something invisible seemed to grip me, and my head turned on its own. Then I saw him. Cain sat completely still in the shadows, his arms resting on his knees. His eyes, golden, sharp, locked directly on me, gleamed like a predator watching prey. His hair was messy and wild. Scars marked his face in several places, but he was so devastatingly beautiful that my heart stopped beating for a full second. He smiled slowly, carefully, dangerously, and then he said, "Finally, I found you." My entire world stopped in that moment. I couldn't sleep that night. His voice kept circling through my mind on an endless loop. Finally, I found you. What did that even mean? I'd never seen him before in my life. I was just an orphan trying to survive each day without getting hurt or discarded. So why was he speaking as if I were the end of some long search he'd been conducting? I lay on the thin mattress in my assigned quarters, staring at the cracked ceiling. The other orphan workers had warned me about Block 7. They said the prisoners there weren't just criminals, they were weapons. Monsters that the government kept locked away because killing them would cause political disasters. Cain Ashford was the worst of them all, they said, a tactical genius who could manipulate entire military operations. An alpha so powerful that even other alphas submitted to him. And now he'd looked at me. I was something precious. It didn't make sense. When morning came, I was exhausted but forced myself to get ready. My hands shook as I loaded the breakfast trays onto the cart. The other servers avoided looking at me. They knew where I was assigned now, and none of them wanted that contamination. "You okay?" one of the older Omegas asked quietly as I passed. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Just keep your head down and don't engage," she whispered. "Alphas like him, they play games. Don't let him get in your head." Too late, I thought. He was already there. When I reached Block 7 again, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I told myself to just do the job and leave. Keep my eyes down. Don't speak. Don't react. But when I approached cell 407, something was wrong. The door was slightly open. My heart slammed against my chest. That never happened. This was a high-security block. Maximum containment. So how was his cell door even partially unsealed? "Jamie." I jerked to a stop. He knew my name. How did he know my name? Cain stood near the doorway, heavy chains wrapped around his wrists and connected to the wall behind him. But his posture was completely relaxed, like he wasn't afraid at all, like those chains were just decorative accessories. He here for appearance. "How do you know what I'm called?" I asked before I could stop myself, then immediately cursed my stupidity. Asking questions meant engaging with him. and engaging meant trouble. He moved closer in one smooth motion, so close that his scent surrounded me, raw pine, smoke, and something undeniably possessive. My Omega instincts reacted instantly. My knees weakened. "Because I've been searching for you for 3 years," he said quietly, and strange intensity burning in his golden eyes. "You won't remember me, but I never forgot you." "What?" I stammered. He leaned down, bringing his face close to mine. "Your mother hid you back then, but your scent, your presence, that signal is still so strong that I could identify you among thousands of people." Something inside me shattered. Was he telling the truth? Had my mother hidden me from someone? And that someone was Cain. "I've never met you," I said, but my voice was shaking. "You did. Once." He straightened and looked at me like I was some kind of treasure. "And from that moment on, I knew you were mine." The tray slipped from my hands and crashed to the floor. The metal clattered loudly through the corridor, but all I could see was the depth in his eyes. No lies there, only an unshakable conviction. I backed away slowly, my breath coming in short gasps. "I don't understand," I whispered. Cain tilted his head, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. "You will," he said simply. "When you're ready, you'll remember. And when that happens, you'll understand why I surrendered, why I'm here, why I've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For you to be safe enough to find." He stepped back, giving me space but never breaking eye contact. "Your parents were killed because they exposed something dangerous. The people responsible wanted to erase the entire family. But your mother was smart. She hid you where they couldn't reach you." My chest tightened. "And where was that?" "In plain sight," Cain said. "Among the orphans, where no one would think to look for the child of two people who knew too much." I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But most of all, I wanted to know if he was lying or if my entire life had been built on secrets I never knew existed. "Why should I believe you?" I asked. Cain smiled again, but this time it was softer, almost sad. "Because deep down, Jamie, you already do." And the worst part was, he was right. I spent the next 2 days avoiding Cain as much as possible. But his words haunted every moment. "You already believe me." Did I? Could I really trust anything a war criminal said? No matter how sincere he seemed. The logical part of my brain screamed no. But something deeper, something primal in my Omega nature, kept pulling me back to that cell, to those golden eyes, to that voice that made my heart race. On the third morning, I made a decision. I would ask him direct questions. If he was manipulating me, I'd catch him in a lie. If he was telling the truth, well, I'd deal with that if it happened. When I arrived at cell 407, Cain was already waiting by the door. His chains were still attached, but I noticed they seemed looser than before, like he could break free whenever he wanted but chose not to. "You came back," he said, and there was genuine relief in his tone. "I have to," I replied flatly. "It's my job. That's not why you're here right now." I set the tray down harder than necessary. "You said my mother hid me. From what? From who?" Cain studied me for a long moment before answering. "From an organization that trades in Omega genetics. They were experimenting with forced bonding, trying to create perfect alpha-omega pairs for military purposes. Your parents discovered the facility by accident when they were investigating something else entirely." My stomach turned. "That's insane." "It's true," Cain said. "And when your parents reported what they'd found, the organization went underground. But they couldn't risk any witnesses. So they eliminated your parents and started hunting for you." "Why me, specifically?" "Because you'd already been scanned," Cain said quietly. "They had your genetic profile on file. You were marked as a potential perfect match for one of their alpha subjects." "Which alpha?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Cain's expression darkened. "Me." The air left my lungs. "They captured me when I was 19, he continued. "Forced me through their program. Tried to break my mind and turn me into a weapon they could control. But I fought back, destroyed their facility from the inside and escaped. I've been hunting them ever since, taking down every branch of their operation I could find, and searching for me." I whispered. "Yes." His eyes held mine. "Because even though they tried to force a bond, something real happened that day they had us in the same room. You were only 13, they brought you in for evaluation, and when I saw you," he paused, "everything in me recognized you. Not because of their experiments, but because you were genuinely meant to be mine." I shook my head. That's not how biology works, isn't it? Cain challenged. You've felt it too, haven't you? The way your scent changes around me even though you're on suppressants. The way your body responds to my presence. That's not programming, Jamie. That's instinct. He was right. And I hated that he was right. Even if any of this is true, I said carefully, you're still a criminal. You've killed people. I've killed the people who tortured children, Cain corrected. The ones who experimented on omegas and alphas like we were lab rats. Yes, I destroyed governments. But only the parts that were funding these operations. Every single person I eliminated was directly involved in that program. How noble, I said sarcastically. But my voice lacked conviction. Cain stepped closer, and I didn't move away this time. I'm not asking you to forgive what I've done. I'm asking you to understand why I did it. And I'm telling you that you're still in danger. The organization isn't dead. It's just hiding better now. Then why are you here in prison instead of out there protecting me? Because this is where you are, he said simply. The council placed you here deliberately. Someone inside the government is connected to the organization, and they're using you as bait to draw me out. They meme I'd break in, try to rescue you, and they'd capture me in the act. But you surrendered instead. Exactly. Cain smiled slightly. They wanted me on the outside trying to break in. So I came inside willingly. Now I'm exactly where I need to be. Between you and anyone who might try to hurt you. My head was spinning. This is completely insane. I know it sounds that way, Cain said gently. But think about it, Jamie. Why would they assign a 16-year-old orphan to work in a maximum security prison? Why specifically in the block where I'm held? It's not coincidence. He had a point. I'd wondered about that myself, but assumed it was just cruel bureaucratic randomness. What do they want? I asked. They want to study what happens when we're in proximity, Cain said. They want to see if the bond they tried to create artificially will manifest naturally. And if it does, they'll take you again. Use you to control me. That won't work, I said automatically. Won't it? His eyes searched mine. If they threatened you, Jamie, there's nothing I wouldn't do. And they know it. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. This man, this dangerous, beautiful, terrifying man, had restructured his entire existence around keeping me safe, and I didn't know whether to be grateful or horrified. I need time, I said finally, to think about all of this. Cain nodded. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As I walked away from his cell that day, my mind was a chaotic mess of information and emotion. But one thing was becoming clear. Whether I wanted it or not, my life was tangled with Cain's in ways I couldn't simply ignore. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all my fear and resistance, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, being tangled with him wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Maybe it was exactly where I was supposed to be. For the next 2 days, I tried to maintain distance from Cain, but his revelation kept playing in my mind like a film I couldn't stop watching. You were genuinely meant to be mine. What did that even mean in practical terms? Fated mates existed only in stories and old Omega folklore. Real life didn't work that way. Alphas wanted control and power. They didn't actually believe in mystical connections. So why was Cain insisting we had something deeper than biology or programming? But the most terrifying part was that my body kept responding to him. Every time I entered Block 7, my scent would shift subtly sweeter, which shouldn't happen because I was taking suppressants religiously. This was the kind of biological reaction I couldn't control, and that lack of control frightened me more than anything Cain had told me. Today, when I reached cell 407, I noticed something immediately wrong. Cain's food tray from yesterday was still sitting exactly where I'd left it, completely untouched. Why haven't you eaten? I asked without looking at him, trying to keep my voice neutral. Because you weren't the one who brought it, he answered, as if this explanation was perfectly reasonable. Your scent wasn't on it. Food doesn't appeal to me without that. I clenched my fists. That's manipulative. It's honest, Cain corrected. I'm not trying to manipulate you, Jamie. I'm telling you how my alpha biology responds to you. I can't change it any more than you can change how your scent sweetens when I'm near. I hated that he'd noticed that too. This whole situation is wrong, I said, finally meeting his eyes. Even if everything you've told me is true, we can't just act like this is normal. I never said it was normal, Cain replied. I said it was real. There's a difference. Before I could respond, voices echoed down the corridor. guards approaching on their rounds. I quickly shoved the new breakfast tray through the slot and stepped back, trying to look professional and uninvolved. But as the guards passed, I heard one of them mutter something under his breath about the Omega bait and laugh darkly. My blood went cold. Cain heard it too. His entire body went rigid, and his eyes flashed that dangerous golden color. But he didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the guards walk away with an expression that promised consequences. When they were gone, I looked at him. What did he mean by that? Exactly what I told you before, Cain said, his voice tight with controlled anger. You're being used. They positioned you here deliberately to provoke a reaction from me. But you haven't reacted, I pointed out. Haven't I? He gestured to the uneaten food. I'm already behaving differently because of you. They're documenting everything. How often you visit, how long you stay, how my vitals change when you're near. They're building a profile of the bond between us. There is no bond, I insisted, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. Cain moved closer to the cell bars, as close as his chains would allow. Then why are you still here, Jamie? Why do you keep coming back even when you don't have to? Why do you ask me questions instead of just doing your job and leaving? I opened my mouth to answer but couldn't find words that weren't lies. I'll tell you why, Cain continued softly. Because part of you recognizes this connection too. Part of you knows that what we have isn't something they created in a lab. It's something that existed if they ever tried to interfere. How can you be so sure? I whispered. Because I've spent 3 years searching for you, he said. 3 years following every lead, tracking every movement of that organization, waiting for the moment when I could find you again. And when I finally saw you standing outside my cell, everything else disappeared. The mission, the revenge, the anger, all of it became secondary to making sure you were safe. His intensity was overwhelming. I took a step back, needing space to breathe. What if I don't want this? I asked. What if I want a normal life where I'm not connected to war criminals and secret organizations? Pain flickered across Cain's face, but he didn't look away. Then I'll respect that. I'll keep you safe from a distance. But I won't stop protecting you, Jamie. That's not something I can turn off. Even if I ask you to, even then, the certainty in his voice should have annoyed me. Instead, it made something in my chest ache. I don't understand you, I admitted. You don't have to understand me, Cain said. You just have to trust that everything I'm doing is for your benefit, not mine. How is being imprisoned for your benefit? He smiled slightly. It's not. But it keeps me close to you, and that's all that matters right now. I left his cell that day more confused than ever. Back in my quarters, I tried to process everything logically. Cain was either telling the truth about a vast conspiracy, or he was a master manipulator who knew exactly which emotional strings to pull. But manipulators didn't usually starve themselves to make a point. They didn't surrender their freedom just to be near someone. And they definitely didn't look at you like you were the only thing in the world that mattered. That night, I made a decision. I would test him, ask him something he couldn't possibly know if he was lying. The next morning, I went to cell 407 earlier than usual. Cain was awake, sitting in the same position as always, but his eyes brightened when he saw me. Tell me something about that day, I said without preamble. The day you supposedly saw me in that facility, something specific that would prove you're not making this up. Cain didn't hesitate. You were wearing a blue sweater with a small tear on the left sleeve. Your mother had tried to fix it with white thread that didn't quite match. You were holding a book about astronomy, and when they brought you into the observation room, you didn't cry or panic like the other children. You just looked around calmly, analyzing everything, trying to understand what was happening. My heart stopped. I had that sweater. It was in a box of my mother's things, the only personal item they'd let me keep when I became a ward of the state. And I'd been obsessed with astronomy when I was 13. How? I couldn't finish the sentence. Because I was there, Jamie, Cain said gently. And I've remembered every single detail about you since that moment. Something inside me broke open. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was fear. But whatever wall I'd built around my heart cracked just enough to let a sliver of belief through. Okay, I whispered. Okay? Cain repeated, hope flickering in his eyes. I believe you, I said. I don't know what that means yet, or what happens next, but I believe you're telling the truth. Cain's entire expression transformed. The dangerous war criminal disappeared, replaced by something softer, something almost vulnerable. Thank you, he said quietly. And for the first time since my parents died, I didn't feel completely alone. That night I sat alone in my small quarters, turning Cain's words over and over in my mind. Was he really telling me the truth? My parents' murder wasn't random. Everyone had told me that much. But nobody ever gave me details. Just vague explanations about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now a war criminal was telling me it had all been planned, orchestrated, and that I was next on someone's list. Part of me wanted to trust him because his eyes held no deception, but another part feared this might all be an elaborate trap. The next morning when I arrived at cell 407, I found guards clustered outside Cain's door in what looked like an emergency meeting. I hung back, trying to listen without being noticed. What happened? I finally asked a junior guard who'd always been somewhat friendly toward me. He glanced around nervously before leaning closer. Cain sent 2 guards to the hospital last night. They were passing through during rounds, and said something offensive about you. He broke their arms. My heart sank into my stomach. He'd become violent because of me. And I couldn't decide whether I should be terrified or feel protected. When I finally entered his cell area, Cain sat in his usual spot looking completely calm, as if nothing had happened. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes tracked my every movement with focused intensity. Why would you do something like that? I demanded, anger rising in my voice. Because they disrespected you, Cain replied without a trace of remorse. And I don't tolerate anyone showing disrespect toward my Omega. I'm not your property, I shouted, frustration pouring out of me. In one swift movement, he closed the distance between us and caught my waist, pulling me against his chest before I could react. My heartbeat thundered so loudly I knew he could hear it. Alphas could always hear an Omega's racing pulse. Not property. Mate, he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. And protecting a mate isn't a choice, Jamie. It's instinct. I wanted to pull away. Every logical part of my brain screamed that I should step back, create distance, maintain boundaries. But my body refused to cooperate. Instead, I found myself melting into his warmth, as if my physical form had already decided this was where safety lived. For the first time since my parents died, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely alone in the world. And that feeling scared me almost as much as it comforted me. Cain released me slowly, as if he understood I needed space to process what was happening between us. Those guards won't bother you again, he said quietly. You can't just hurt people because they say things you don't like. I argued, though my voice lacked conviction. Can't I? He tilted his head. What would you have me do, Jamie? Stand by while they make crude comments about an Omega under my protection? That's not who I am. Under your protection, I repeated. I never asked for that. You didn't have to ask. Cain moved back to give me breathing room. The moment I recognized you, you became mine to protect. That's not something I can turn off or ignore. I wrapped my arms around myself. What if I don't want this responsibility? What if I just want to survive each day without being part of some larger conspiracy? Then I'll make sure you can do exactly that, Cain said. But I won't lie to you about the danger you're in. And I won't stop protecting you, even if you ask me. That's not fair. No, he agreed. It's not. But it's the truth. I stared at him for a long moments, searching for any sign of manipulation or deceit. All I found was unwavering certainty. The guards who talked about me, I said slowly. What exactly did they say? Cain's jaw tightened. Nothing you need to hear repeated. Tell me anyway. He studied my face, then sighed. They were making bets about how long it would take before someone here claimed you. Discussing which alpha would get to you first. Talking about you like you were a prize to be won rather than a person deserving respect. Nausea rolled through my stomach. I'd known some of the guards looked at me strangely, but I'd tried to convince myself I was imagining things. And that's why you hurt them, I said quietly. That's why I made sure they'd never speak about you that way again. Cain corrected. There's a difference between random violence and calculated consequences. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me was horrified by his actions. But another part, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, felt vindicated that someone had finally stood up for me. You're making this very complicated, I whispered. Cain's expression softened. I know, and I'm sorry for that, but I won't apologize for keeping you safe. Over the next few days I noticed subtle changes in how the prison staff treated me. Guards who used to leer now looked away, Inmates who used to make comments when I passed fell silent. Word had clearly spread about what happened, and everyone understood that I was under Cain's protection whether I'd asked for it or not. I should have hated the attention. Instead, I felt something close to relief. During my rounds, I started lingering longer at cell 407. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Cain never pushed for more than I was willing to give. Never demanded answers to questions I wasn't ready to face. He just existed in that space, solid and certain, like an anchor in rough waters. "Can I ask you something?" I said one morning while delivering his breakfast. "Anything. If you could leave right now, if those chains weren't holding you, would you go?" Cain didn't hesitate. "No. Why not? You could escape, disappear, live your life somewhere they'd never find you. Because you're here," he said simply. "And wherever you are is where I need to be." The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. "That's insane." Maybe he smiled slightly. "But it's also the truth. I've spent 3 years searching for you, Jamie. I'm not going to walk away now that I've found you, even if staying means being imprisoned." Even then, his golden eyes held mine. "Some things are worth any price. You're one of them." I left his cell that day with tears in my eyes, though I couldn't explain exactly why I was crying. Maybe it was because nobody had ever valued me enough to sacrifice their freedom. Maybe it was because I was starting to believe that what Cain felt for me was real. Or maybe it was because I was beginning to feel something back, and that terrified me more than anything else. That night, lying in my narrow bed, I made a decision. I would stop fighting what was growing between us. Not because I understood it, and not because it made sense, but because denying it was exhausting. Cain had shown me through actions, not just words, that he meant what he said. He'd given up his freedom to stay close to me. He'd hurt people who threatened my dignity. He'd been patient and I pushed him away, and gentle when I came back. Maybe it was time I stopped questioning his motives and started accepting that some connections couldn't be explained. They could only be felt. And what I felt when I was near Cain was something I'd never experienced before. Something that made me feel seen, valued, and protected in a world that had treated me like I was disposable. Tomorrow, I decided, I would tell him that I was ready to stop running from whatever this was between us. Tomorrow, I would take the first real step toward accepting that maybe, just maybe, I'd found exactly what I'd been missing my entire life. The following week brought an incident that changed everything. Late one night, the prison's electrical system failed completely, plunging the entire facility into darkness. Emergency lockdown procedures activated automatically, sealing all inmates in their cells. But I'd been working a late shift, finishing my final rounds in the food corridor, and now I was trapped alone in the dark. Only emergency red lights flickered along the walls, casting everything in an eerie crimson glow. My breathing quickened as fear crept through my chest. I knew from whispered stories that during power failures, some inmates managed to break their locks. And I was an Omega, completely unprotected, in the middle of a maximum security prison. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming toward me. "Jamie." My entire body froze at the sound of my name. But this wasn't Cain's voice. It belonged to someone else. Someone whose tone carried a strange familiarity I couldn't quite place. A figure emerged from the shadows. A shorter alpha with wild eyes that gleamed with something dangerous, something unhinged. He held a makeshift blade, probably fashioned from contraband materials, and hidden for exactly this kind of opportunity. "I've been looking for you for a long time, Orphan," he said, twisting the blade in his hand. "Your parents destroyed my entire network when they exposed our operation to the authorities. They leaked our identities, our locations, everything. Now it's time to finish what we started with your family." He never completed his sentence. In less than a second, Cain appeared from nowhere and grabbed the alpha by the throat, slamming him against the concrete wall with devastating force. I couldn't understand how he'd gotten there so fast, as if he'd already escaped his cell before the lockdown even began. "Touch him again," Cain growled, his alpha voice so dominant and powerful that my knees buckled and I had to grab the wall for support. "And I'll make sure you beg for death." The hostile alpha crumpled unconscious with a single blow. Cain turned to me, his eyes still glowing that fierce golden color, pure alpha instinct radiating from him. "You okay?" I could only nod. My voice had disappeared completely, and my hands were shaking uncontrollably. Without asking permission, he pulled me into his arms, and I collapsed against his chest like he was the only solid thing left in the world. For the first time since my parents died, I felt genuinely safe. His warmth surrounded me, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear, his scent wrapping around me like a protective shield. "I'll never let anyone hurt you," he whispered near my ear, his hand moving gently through my hair in a soothing gesture. And in that moment, I stopped fighting. I stopped questioning. I simply trusted him completely and without reservation. When the lights came back on 20 minutes later, guards flooded the corridor and found us still standing there. Me wrapped in Cain's protective embrace, the unconscious Alpha sprawled nearby. The investigation that followed revealed exactly what Cain had warned me about. The attacker was confirmed as a member of the same criminal organization that had murdered my parents. He'd been planted in the prison specifically to get close to me, waiting for the perfect opportunity to complete his mission. Security footage showed everything. How Cain had somehow managed to break his restraints before the lockdown. How he'd positioned himself in the corridor to intercept any threat to me. How he'd protected me without hesitation. The authorities looked at him differently after that. This wasn't the action of a mindless war criminal. This was calculated protection, strategic thinking, someone who'd prioritized my safety above his own freedom. Over the next few days, I couldn't stay away from Cain even if I'd wanted to. This wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, something that made my chest ache whenever we were apart. During meals, I found myself lingering at his cell longer than necessary. During breaks, I'd walk past Block 7 just to feel closer to him. At night, I'd lie awake remembering how secure I'd felt in his arms, how right it had seemed to be there. The other orphan workers noticed the change in me. "You're getting attached to that prisoner," one of them warned during lunch. "That's dangerous." "Maybe," I admitted, "but he saved my life." "He's still a criminal." "Is he?" I challenged. "Or is he someone who fought back against people who deserve to be stopped?" She didn't have an answer for that. 2 weeks after the attack, the council made their decision. Cain would be transferred to a different facility, one with less restrictive conditions, as recognition of his cooperation during the investigation. The new location would allow him more freedom, better conditions, acknowledgement that perhaps his crimes weren't as clear-cut as they'd originally seemed. I should have been happy for him. Instead, all I felt was devastating loss. On his last day at the prison, I went to his cell one final time. He was already packed, what few possessions he had gathered into a small bag. "So this is it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not if you don't want it to be," Cain replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope, pressing it into my hands. His fingers lingered against mine, the touch sending warmth through my entire body. "What is this?" I asked. "An address," he said quietly. "A place I prepared for you 3 years ago, when I first started searching. It's yours, Jamie. Whenever you're ready." "I'm an orphan," I whispered, tears threatening to spill. "I don't have anywhere to go." Cain cupped my face gently in his hands and pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. The first kiss I'd ever received, tender and full of unspoken promises. "You have me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I have you. This bond between us isn't something they created in a laboratory. It's something real, something fated. You might need time to understand that fully, but I'll wait. However long it takes." He left that day, escorted by guards to a transport vehicle. But his scent remained on my clothes, on my skin, embedded in my memory. 1 month later, when I officially aged out of the orphan system and became a legal adult, I opened that envelope with trembling hands. Inside was an address in a quiet town I'd never heard of. Below it, written in Cain's careful handwriting, were the words, "Come home, Jamie. Where you've always belonged. Where I'm waiting for you." I smiled for the first time in months, a real smile that came from somewhere deep inside my soul. Then I packed my few belongings into a worn backpack and headed toward the address, my heart full of hope for the first time since my parents had died. Because I finally understood the truth. I wasn't alone anymore. I belonged to him, and he had always belonged to me. The bus ride to the address took 6 hours through countryside I'd never seen before. I clutched the envelope in my hand, the entire time reading and rereading Cain's words until I had them memorized. When I finally arrived in the small town, I felt overwhelmed by how different it was from the prison. Clean streets, quiet neighborhoods, people who smiled at strangers. This was the kind of place I'd imagined normal people lived, people who had families and homes and futures. I found the address written on the envelope, a modest house at the end of a tree-lined street. It looked warm and inviting, with a small garden in front and curtains in the windows. Nothing like what I'd expected from someone with Cain's background. My hand shook as I knocked on the door. It opened immediately, as if he'd been waiting right there. Cain stood in the doorway, and seeing him outside the prison context stole my breath. He wore simple civilian clothes, jeans and a dark shirt, and his hair was slightly longer than I remembered. But his eyes were the same, that intense golden gaze that saw straight through to my soul. "You came," he said softly, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "You asked me to," I replied. He stepped aside to let me enter. The house was exactly what I'd imagined a real home would be. Comfortable furniture, warm lighting, photographs on the walls. But what caught my attention was a room visible through an open doorway, clearly prepared specifically for me. I could see bookshelves, a desk, everything an 18-year-old might need. "You really did prepare this 3 years ago," I whispered. "I told you I would never stop looking for you," Cain said from behind me. "This house, that room, everything was waiting for the day you'd be ready to come home." I turned to face him, tears streaming down my cheeks. "Why me? Of all the people in the world, why am I worth this much to you?" Cain closed the distance between us and wiped my tears away with gentle thumbs. "Because when I saw you that first time in the facility, something in me recognized something in you. Not because they forced it, not ton of experiments or manipulation, but because genuine connections exist. Jamie, and ours is real. I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "I don't know how to be someone's mate or partner or whatever we're supposed to be." "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. "No pressure, no expectations. Just us, learning as we go." "What if I mess everything up?" Cain smiled and pulled me into his arms, and I went willingly this time. No hesitation, no fear. "Then we'll fix it together. That's what mates do." Over the following weeks I learned what it meant to have a home again. Cain showed me how to cook meals I'd never tasted before. We watched movies together on his old couch. He taught me how to garden in the small backyard, explaining that growing things helped him stay grounded after everything he'd been through. Some nights I'd wake from nightmares about my parents, and Cain would be there, holding me until the fear passed. He never asked me to explain, never demanded more than I could give. He just provided steady, constant support. "Tell me about them," he said one evening while we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Your parents." I hesitated, then found myself sharing memories I'd kept locked away for months. "My mother loved astronomy. She'd take me outside at night and point out constellations. My father was terrible at cooking, but he tried anyway because he said family meals were important." "They sound wonderful," Cain said quietly. "They were." I leaned against his shoulder. "They died protecting me from something they barely understood, and I couldn't save them." "You were a child, Jamie. It wasn't your responsibility to save them." "But I could." "No." Cain's voice was firm. "You survived, which is exactly what they would have wanted. And now you're here, safe, building a new life. That honors their memory more than guilt ever fair." His words broke something open inside me, and I cried for the first time since their deaths. Really cried, releasing all the grief I'd been holding back. Cain held me through it all, his presence unwavering. 1 month after arriving, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. "What happens now, with the organization that killed my parents?" Cain's expression grew serious. "They're still out there, but they're fractured and disorganized. The authorities are tracking them, and I've given them everything I know. You're safe here, Jamie. I made sure of that before I even let you come. You always think ahead, don't you? When it comes to you." "Yes." He took my hand. "I need you to understand something. My past, the things I've done, I can't change them. But everything I did was to dismantle that organization and find you. I don't regret it." "I know," I said, "and I'm not asking you to regret it. I'm just trying to understand who you really are beneath all the labels people gave you." Cain squeezed my hand gently. "I'm someone who found the person he was meant to protect and love. Everything else is just context." 6 months passed in what felt like moments. I enrolled in online classes, working toward a degree I'd never thought I'd be able to afford. Cain supported me in every way, financially, emotionally, practically. He never made me feel like I owed him anything, never held his generosity over my head. Slowly, I began to believe I deserved this happiness. One evening, as we prepared dinner together, a routine we developed where he chopped vegetables while I managed the stove. I realized something had shifted. "I love you," I said suddenly, the words spilling out before I could second-guess them. Cain froze, the knife suspended mid-cut. Then he set it down carefully and turned to face me. "Say that again," he whispered. "I love you," I repeated, more certain this time. "I don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between you protecting me in that prison and you teaching me how to make pasta, I fell in love with you." Cain crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and kissed me. Really kissed me for the first time. It was gentle and passionate and perfect, and when we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. "I've loved you since the moment I saw you 3 years ago," he said against my lips. "I just didn't want to pressure you into feeling the same." "You couldn't pressure me into this," I assured him. "This is real. We're real." "Yes," Cain agreed, pulling me close again. "We are." That night, wrapped in Cain's arms in the bed we now shared, I thought about how far I'd come from that terrified 16-year-old orphan in a prison corridor. I'd found my home, not in a place but in a person, and he'd found his home in me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever remnants of the past tried to resurface, we'd face them together. Because we weren't just Omega and Alpha. We weren't just survivor and protector. We were mates in the truest sense, 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds, and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage of our pasts. And that was worth everything.